others, urging them to take action in this conflict.
News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we're coming on the air at this hour because President Biden is about to make an historic announcement nominating Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson as the first black woman to the Supreme Court. It was just 2 years ago today on the campaign trail, just before the South Carolina primary. Joe Biden promised, if elected, he would nominate the first black woman to the high court. He has kept that promise. The president sending out a message a short time ago saying she is one of our nation's brightest legal minds and will be an exceptional justice. The White House says President Biden conducted a rigorous process before naming a successor to retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. She was one of several names in the president's short list, but it was long believed that she was at the top of the list. She is 51, a mother, a wife, and was just last year appointed to the D.C. Federal Appeals Court, receiving bipartisan support. 3 Republicans joining Democrats, voting to confirm her at the time: Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Senator Lindsey Graham as well. Of course, that same Republican support for a Supreme Court nomination is never certain. Word of her nomination already sparking reaction on Capitol Hill along party lines. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Dick Durbin hoping to begin confirmation hearings in the coming weeks with a final vote by Easter. There have been only 2 black justices on the high court, both men: Clarence Thomas, who is still serving, and Thurgood Marshall, who retired back in 1991 and who died in 1993. Here comes President Biden, the Vice President Kamala Harris, and his nominee to the court. Let's listen.
Good afternoon. Today, as we watch freedom and liberty under attack abroad, I'm here to fulfill my responsibilities under the Constitution to preserve freedom and liberty here in the United States of America. And it's my honor to introduce to the country a daughter of former public school teachers, a proven consensus builder, an accomplished lawyer, a distinguished jurist, one of the nation's most prestigious courts. My nominee for the United States Supreme Court is Judge Ketanji Jackson. You know, 4 weeks ago, when a member of the court, a friend of mine, we used to work together in the Senate, Justice Stephen Breyer, announced his retirement, I said then, choosing someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court is one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has, and I mean it. I promised the process would be rigorous, that I would select a nominee worthy of Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence and decency. Someone extremely qualified, with a brilliant legal mind, with the utmost character and integrity, which are equally as important. And that I would bring this decision my perspective as a lawyer, former constitutional law professor, chairman of the Judiciary Committee for many, many years, and I'm almost reluctant to say it, someone who's presided over more Supreme Court nominations than almost anyone living today, which makes me 28 years old. I started doing it when I was 32. And who has devoted much of my career to thinking about the Constitution and the role of the Supreme Court. With that perspective, I carefully studied the record of candidates. I've invited senators of both political parties to offer their ideas and points of view, and I've met with a number of them. As a result, because I truly respect not only the consent, I know they give consent, but it says, the Constitution says advice and consent. And I sought the advice of Democrats and Republicans. I've consulted with leading legal scholars and lawyers, and I've been fortunate to have the advice of the Vice President Harris, and I mean this sincerely, an exceptional lawyer, a former Attorney General in California, and a former member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And during this process, I look for someone who, like Justice Breyer, has a pragmatic understanding that the law must work for the American people. Someone who has historical perspective to understand that the Constitution is a resilient charter of liberty. Someone with the wisdom to appreciate that the Constitution protects certain inalienable rights, rights that fall within the most fundamental personal freedoms that our society recognizes. And again, someone with extraordinary character will bring to the Supreme Court an independent mind, uncompromising integrity, and with a strong moral compass and the courage to stand up for what she thinks is right. For too long, our government, our courts, haven't looked like America. And I believe it's time that we have a court reflects the full talents and greatness of our nation, with a nominee of extraordinary qualifications. And that we inspire all young people to believe that they can one day serve their country at the highest level. I've admired these traits of pragmatism, historical perspective, wisdom, character in the jurists nominated by Republican presidents as well as Democratic presidents. And today, I'm pleased to introduce to the American people a candidate who continues in this great tradition. Judge Jackson grew up in Miami, Florida. And by the way, the mayor of Miami, a Republican, endorsed you. I thought that was interesting. Her parents grew up with segregation, but never gave up hope that their children would enjoy the true promise of America. Her parents graduated from historic black colleges and became public school teachers. Her mom, a principal. Her dad, a teacher who later went back to school and became a lawyer representing that very school district, that school board. Judge Jackson describes finding her love for the law from an apartment complex at the University of Miami where her dad was attending law school. She'd draw in her coloring book at the dining room table next to her dad's law books. She grew up to be a star student, elected mayor of her junior high school, and president of her high school class, where she was a standout. She was a standout in the speech and debate team. And it was after a debate tournament that took place at Harvard when she was in high school that she believed she could one day be a student there. There were those who told her she shouldn't set her sights too high, but she refused to accept limits others set for her. She did go on to Harvard undergraduate school, where she graduated magna cum laude. She went to attend Harvard Law School, where she was a top student and editor of the prestigious Law Review. Then she applied for a highly competitive and coveted clerkship on the United States Supreme Court, and she was selected. The justice who thought she was worthy of this high honor was a young lawyer, was none other than Justice Stephen Breyer, whose seat I'm nominating her to fill. Not only did she learn about being a judge from Justice Breyer himself, she saw the great rigor through which Justice Breyer approached his work. She learned from his willingness to work with colleagues with different viewpoints, critical qualities, in my view, for any Supreme Court justice. Now, years later, she steps up to fill Justice Breyer's place in the court with a uniquely accomplished and wide-ranging background. She served both in public service as a federal public defender, and in private law practice as an accomplished lawyer and with a prestigious law firm. If confirmed, she will join Justice Sotomayor as the only other member of the United States Supreme Court who has experience as a trial court judge, a critical qualification in my view, and once again, following the footsteps of her mentor, Justice Breyer, she'd become the only member of the court who previously served as a member of the United States Sentencing Commission. And she brings additional perspective to the court as well. She comes from a family of law enforcement, with her brother and uncles having served as police officers. That's one reason I expect by the Fraternal Order of Police, the national organization today, said, and I quote, "There's little doubt she has the temperament, the intellect, and the legal experience and family background have earned disappointment." And they went on to say, they're confident she will, quote, "approach her future cases with an open mind and treat issues related to law enforcement fairly and justly." Incredibly, Judge Jackson has already been confirmed by the United States Senate 3 times. First, to serve on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, a bipartisan independent commission I helped design to reduce the unwarranted disparities in sentencing and promote transparency and fairness in the criminal justice system. On the commission, Judge Jackson was known for working with Democrats and Republicans to find common ground on critical issues. Second, she was confirmed by the United States Senate with bipartisan support on the federal district court to administer justice with the special rigors and fairness that come with presiding over trials. And third, she was confirmed with bipartisan Senate vote to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, considered the second most powerful court behind the Supreme Court itself, and the court she once argued cases before as a distinguished advocate. And when Judge Jackson was nominated to the Circuit Court, One of his distinguished retired members, Judge Thomas Griffith, a former general counsel of Brigham Young University and a George Bush appointee to the court, said he backed her enthusiastically, hailing her exemplary legal career in both public and private practice. And he went on to say her careful approach as a trial court judge. Judge Jackson's service on the District Circuit Court for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is another superb qualification for service on the Supreme Court. 3 of the current Supreme Court justices also served as the D.C. Circuit judges, where Judge Jackson now serves. Her opinions are always carefully reasoned, tethered to precedent, and demonstrate respect for how the law impacts everyday people. It doesn't mean she puts her thumb on the scale of justice one way or the other, but she understands the broader impact of her decisions. Whether it's cases addressing the rights of workers or government service, she cares about making sure that our democracy works for the American people. She listens. She looks people in the eye, lawyers, defendants, victims, and families. And she strives to ensure that everyone understands why she made a decision, what the law is, and what it means to them. She strives to be fair, to get it right, to do justice. That's something all of us should remember, and it's something I've thought about throughout this process. And as a matter of fact, I thought about it walking over here with her. One floor below, we have several displays celebrating Black History Month. One of them includes the judicial oath of office taken and signed by Justice Thurgood Marshall himself, an oath that will be once again administered to a distinguished American who will help write the next chapter in the history of the journey of America, a journey that Judge Jackson will take with her family. I hope I don't embarrass him, but her husband, Patrick, a surgeon, Dr. Patrick, stand up, let him see who you are. There you go. They met when they were undergraduate students at Harvard, and he's a distinguished cancer surgeon at Georgetown. And like so many women in this country, Judge Jackson is a working mom. She had her eldest child, Talia, when she was a private lawyer in practice. She had her second child, Layla, when she served on the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Stand up, Layla. I asked Layla when I showed her through the office whether she'd like to be president. She looked, no. There's other things. Anyway, Layla, you're welcome to be here. Thank you so much. And welcome your sister who's up in school in Rhode Island now. I have children and grandchildren. Let me tell you, Judge, you're always a mom. That's not going to change no matter what you're doing. Whether you're on the Supreme Court or not. And I've always had a deep respect for the Supreme Court and judiciary as a co-equal branch of the government. I mean it. The court is equally as important as the presidency or the Congress. It's co-equal. So today, I'm pleased to nominate Judge Jackson, who will bring extraordinary qualifications, deep experience and intellect, and a rigorous judicial record to the court. Judge Jackson deserves to be confirmed as the next Justice of the Supreme Court. I've met with the chairman and ranking members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Chuck Grassley, and my hope is that they will move promptly, and I know they'll move fairly. Judge Jackson, congratulations, and the podium is yours. Let me pull this out for you.
An extraordinary moment for any nominee, but so profound, given the history being made today with this particular choice. Judge Jackson, of course, the first Black woman nominated to serve on the Supreme Court.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am truly humbled by the extraordinary honor of this nomination, and I am especially grateful for the care that you have taken in discharging your constitutional duty in service of our democracy with all that is going on in the world today. I also offer my sincere thanks to you as well, Madam Vice President, for your invaluable role in this nomination process. I must begin these very brief remarks by thanking God for delivering me to this point in my professional journey. My life has been blessed beyond measure, and I do know that one can only come this far by faith. Among my many blessings, and indeed the very first, is the fact that I was born in this great country. The United States of America is the greatest beacon of hope and democracy the world has ever known. I was also blessed from my early days to have had a supportive and loving family. My mother and father, who have been married for 54 years, are at their home in Florida right now, and I know that they could not be more proud. It was my father who started me on this path when I was a child, as the president mentioned. My father made the fateful decision to transition from his job as a public high school history teacher and go to law school. Some of my earliest memories are of him sitting at the kitchen table, reading his law books. I watched him study, and he became my first professional role model. My mother, who was also a public high school teacher, provided invaluable support in those early days, working full-time to enable my father's career transition while also guiding and inspiring 4-year-old me. My only sibling, my brother Ketanji, came along half a decade later, and I'm so proud of all that he's accomplished. After graduating from Howard University, he became a police officer and a detective on some of the toughest streets in the inner city of Baltimore. After that, he enlisted in the Army, serving 2 tours of duty in the Middle East. I believe that he was following the example set by my uncles who are in law enforcement. You may have read that I have one uncle who got caught up in the drug trade and received a life sentence. That is true. But law enforcement also runs in my family. In addition to my brother, I had 2 uncles who served decades as police officers, one of whom became the police chief in my hometown of Miami, Florida. I am standing here today by the grace of God as testament to the love and support that I've received from my family. I have also been blessed with many dear friends, colleagues, mentors, law clerks. I could not possibly name all of the people to whom I owe great thanks. But I must mention specifically the 3 brilliant jurists for whom I had the privilege of serving as a law clerk at the outset of my legal career. U.S. District Judge Patty Saris in Massachusetts, U.S. Court of Appeals Judge Bruce Selya in Rhode Island, and last but certainly not least, Associate Justice Stephen Breyer of the Supreme Court of the United States. Justice Breyer, in particular, not only gave me the greatest job that any young lawyer could ever hope to have, but he also exemplified every day in every way that a Supreme Court justice can perform at the highest level of skill and integrity while also being guided by civility, grace, pragmatism, and generosity of spirit. Justice Breyer, the members of the Senate will decide if I fill your seat, but please know that I could never fill your shoes. To my dear family, those who are here with me now and those who are watching from home, I am forever indebted to you for your love and support. To my beloved husband, Patrick, thank you for being my rock today and every day for these past 26 years. I love you. To my daughters, Talia and Layla, you are the light of my life. Please know that whatever title I may hold or whatever job I may have, I will still be your mom. That will never change. There are so many other people I would love to be able to address and to thank, but time is short, so let me end by sharing an interesting coincidence that has actually meant a great deal to me over the years. As it happens, I share a birthday with the first Black woman ever to be appointed as a federal judge, the Honorable Constance Baker Motley. We were born exactly 49 years to the day apart. Today, I proudly stand on Judge Motley's shoulders, sharing not only her birthday, but also her steadfast and courageous commitment to equal justice under law. Judge Motley's life and career has been a true inspiration to me as I have pursued this professional path. And if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, I can only hope that my life and career, my love of this country and the Constitution, and my commitment to upholding the rule of law and the sacred principles upon which this great nation was founded will inspire future generations of Americans. Thank you again, Mr. President, for this extraordinary honor.
Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson speaking before the American people.
I forgot to introduce the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and the second gentleman. That seems strange to say that, but the second one, Doug Emhoff. They're both here as well, so thank you. Thank you all.
And there you have it. The President, the Vice President applauding the nominee, a nomination that makes history today, the first Black woman to be nominated to the high court in this land. Judge Jackson citing her faith, her loving family, her parents, who she said supported her, both public school teachers. Her father then went on to get a law degree and serve the very school where he was a teacher. She said undoubtedly they're watching from Florida, 54 years of marriage, and she said they're likely very proud of their daughter standing there at the White House today. Her husband, a surgeon, one of her two daughters there at the White House to watch the moment the president named his nominee before the American people. I want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, as you know, 2 years ago to the day, then candidate Joe Biden promised, if elected, he would nominate the first Black woman to the court. It's precisely what he's done.
A campaign promise fulfilled to the American people here today. The president saying it is time the court look like America. I have to tell you, it is striking to see the president make an announcement like this with two Black women standing beside him like that. This president has made a pattern of elevating and promoting women and people of color, today being a very powerful example of that. If confirmed, Judge Jackson will be just the third African-American on the court, and it would bring almost parity to the court with 4 women and 5 men. It also strikes me that the president, in speaking about her record and her resume, he spoke as much about her qualifications as he did her character, her strong moral compass. For Joe Biden, it was important to pick a justice who understands how the law can impact Americans' daily lives. It's likely one of the reasons Judge Jackson's record as a public defender was appealing to him. Looking ahead, this president knows the fight to come well. As a former member of the Senate Judiciary Committee himself, he would welcome bipartisan support. He noted that Judge Jackson has received it in the past, but he knows he doesn't need it. This is about picking the most qualified person for the position, not necessarily someone who can get support from across the aisle, David.
Mary, I know moms across the nation can relate to the moment where she said, no matter what my title is or will be, I will still be your mother. To laughter in the room. I want to bring in our senior congressional correspondent, Rachel Scott. She's live on the Hill. Rachel, the president, as we gathered, would mention that she's been confirmed by the Senate 3 times already, but of course, never a promise when you're talking about a nomination to the high court.
Exactly, David, and expect this to be a very tense and fierce confirmation battle here on Capitol Hill. Actually, 3 Republicans did support her confirmation to the D.C. Circuit, including Senator Lindsey Graham. We have heard from him already today, accusing her of being a pick of the radical left. We know that the Senate wants to move quickly on this, and the reality is that Democrats do not need the support of any Republicans in order to confirm Judge Jackson to the Supreme Court. Republicans lowered the threshold back in 2017. Democrats now have majority in the Senate. The vice president could cast the tie-breaking vote if needed. We know that Senator Dick Durbin, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, wants to move very quickly on this, hoping to get this all wrapped up by Easter. And I just want to take a moment again to just acknowledge the history that we are watching unfolding right now. 115 Supreme Court justices, 108 have been white men. There has never in our nation's history been a Black woman nominated nominated to the court. Jackson is a descendant of slaves. She could soon serve on the Supreme Court that once said that people of African descent in this country are not American citizens. Today, she is cementing her place in history, David.
No question about that. And as you point out, Rachel, the previous votes in support of her from Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Lindsey Graham. Obviously, we will wait to see how this goes, if they'll continue to vote in favor of this nomination. Some partisan words from Lindsey Graham today. Of course, that does not mean that he won't vote to confirm when the time comes. We'll wait to see on that. I want to bring in Devin Dyer, who covers the Supreme Court for ABC News. And Devin, a number of key facts about her life and what led to this moment today that will help shape for Americans when they look at her and what could be the next Associate Justice on the court, what might drive some of her opinions. The president talking about how she makes decisions based on what the law, what the Constitution suggests she do, and that she thinks about how any particular decision will actually affect American lives. I thought it was very interesting. The president also pointed out she has several family members who've worked in law enforcement, and she went on to discuss that as well.
Yeah, no question, David. This is a historic pick on race and gender, but also on experience and perspective. There's never been a public defender on the Supreme Court before, someone who has this much criminal defense experience of everyday Americans who go into the legal system, can't afford an attorney on their own. The president clearly prizing that. She's been described to me as a pragmatist, a consensus builder. Though, as you know, on a conservative court, doing that as a junior justice will be a tall task.
Devin Dyer, who covers the court for us. Devin, thank you again. President Biden making history today, nominating the first black woman to the Supreme Court. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, if confirmed, would be the first black woman on the high court in its 232-year history. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight with much more on this nomination, the history made today, and of course the unfolding situation overseas involving Russia and Ukraine. I'm David Muir in New York. We'll see you a short time from now. Good day.
And David, thank you so much. I'm KYRA Phillips. As you just heard, President Biden making history today, nominating the first black woman to the highest court in the land. For more, we want to bring in our entire team here, White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and former DNC chair and ABC News contributor Donna Brazil. Donna, I'm going to start with you because as we were listening to this announcement, yes, of course, the cameras were rolling. We saw you in the control room, snapping your fingers, doing a little dance, singing a little song, very excited about this moment. I believe we have that video. We will try and roll that. Let's take a look. Personally, a great moment for you. Go ahead now, expand on your excitement, Donna.
Mary, KYRA, you all will understand. I'm also Auntie Donna, and I was texting my niece who just graduated from law school 2 years ago. My family can trace our history for over 400 years in the United States of America. But in 2020, for the first time, we were excited to see Brianna Golden become our first lawyer. Today, Brianna can now think about clerking, not just as she has done in Louisiana and Texas, but also to be a clerk for a Supreme Court justice, and maybe one day she can be on that court. The little girl that was born in Washington, D.C., raised in Miami, Florida today, accepted this challenge. She's a pragmatic judge. She is someone who is a trailblazer, being a public defender, to a lawyer, to someone who served on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, to the district court where my former, quote-unquote, boss, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is a legal pioneer in her own right, she was the first who put her in that pipeline to become a federal judge back in 2013. Here it is 9 years later, having served as also an appellate judge, confirmed by the United States Senate 3 times. I think this is a story that America should celebrate, a moment that we all can find, especially now with all of the challenges. She will be a jurist, someone who will support the Constitution. She knows the legal system because she was there with Stephen Breyer. And I thought when she said, and the line I really love, she said, I may not I may sit in his seat, but I will not, fill his shoes. I'm going to just thank her for, I thought her remarks were great. She gave thanks to God. And most importantly, she said she got here by faith. Her two parents, and I also emailed the president of Howard University, said, hey, Chu, as you know, I'm also affiliated with Howard University as well as Georgetown. This is a tremendous moment because we never thought, as someone once said to all of us as we were growing up in the political system, we never thought we would see this day. And now we have seen it. We're seeing it. We're witnessing.
We are, and you talk about this being quite a story. Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent there at the White House, her story in itself was just remarkable, and she was very transparent, bragging about her family and talking about the good and the bad that she has experienced, really coming full throttle on a very honest and open thank you to President Biden and the American people.
It's remarkable. I mean, to Donna's point, this is just an amazing day that I think, regardless of politics, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, should be celebrated simply because of what it says about how far we have come as a country. We've been talking about this. This is a campaign promise this president made. It is now fulfilled in nominating the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. If confirmed, that she would be the third African-American on the court. It would also bring near parity to the court. For the first time, there would be 4 women and 5 men sitting on the Supreme Court. And speaking of her resume and her background, what struck me so much was that the president spoke just as much about her impeccable legal credentials as he did about just her integrity, her character, her strong moral compass, he said. We know that in this search, Joe Biden was looking for a nominee who would really understand how the law impacts people's daily lives. It's one of the reasons why her record as a public defender likely was so appealing to him. Now, while today is sort of a moment, I think, for the country to celebrate, and for obviously a huge moment for Judge Jackson and her family, there is a political fight ahead. The president speaking about this. He knows what's coming. He spent many years on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He knows this process very, very well. And he's already been reaching across town to Capitol Hill and also reaching across the aisle to speak with lawmakers about what comes next. The president getting that advice and consent going. But the president knows that while Judge Jackson has received bipartisan support in the past, receiving the support of 3 Republicans in her last confirmation for her current position, the president knows that he doesn't need Republican support to get her confirmed. He certainly would welcome it. He thinks she certainly should earn it, given her credentials, but it's not something that he's holding his breath for.
Mary, thank you so much. And straight to the Hill, and our congressional correspondent, Rachel Scott, just listening to Mary talking about the confirmation process ahead. Rachel, I was reading back in 2012 when Jackson was nominated by President Barack Obama to serve on the U.S. District Court in D.C. While waiting on that approval, she came forward saying that stress was so severe that she leaned on knitting scarves to try and relax her and her nerves to get through that waiting process. So as we look through or look forward to the confirmation hearings and approval process, it could take some time. She says she knitted so many scarves, it could have outfitted a small army. I wonder how long this approval process will take, Rachel.
Well, I hope that she has the yarn ready to go if that is what she needs to calm her nerves, because she certainly has a very tense and fierce confirmation battle ahead. Here on Capitol Hill, we have already heard from Republicans today blasting her record. Senator Lindsey Graham, who actually voted to confirm her for the D.C. Circuit, came out and accused her of being a pick of the radical left. But the reality here is that Democrats do not need the support of any Republicans in order to confirm Judge Jackson to the Supreme Court. It was Republicans who lowered the threshold back in 2017. Now all it requires is a simple majority vote. Democrats have the majority in the Senate. The vice president could then cast a tie-breaking vote if necessary. And we've already heard from Senator Dick Durbin. He chairs the Judiciary Committee. He says he wants to move this along very quickly, hoping to get Judge Jackson confirmed to the Supreme Court by Easter, before they leave off on Easter recess on April 8th. And KYRA, I just want to take a moment. We talk so much about the history that we are watching unfold before our eyes right now. And I do think that it's important to note 115 Supreme Court Court justices. 108 of those have been white men. There has never been a black woman even nominated to serve on the bench. Judge Jackson, as a dark-skinned black woman in this country, has had to navigate an immense amount of challenges to get to where she is. When she applied to Harvard, she said that her guidance counselor told her not to set her standards too high. She ended up obviously getting in. She's a descendant of slaves, and she could soon serve on a Supreme Court that once said that people of African descent in this country are not American citizens. This is a very powerful moment, and she certainly is going to know the weight of this moment as well. She talks about how she often comes here to Washington, D.C., walking the streets, and goes to the National Archives to look at the Bill of Rights, to look at the Constitution, because she realizes the power that she holds. Today, she is cementing her place in history as the first black woman to be nominated to the court. KYRA.
Such a colorful background and an interesting person indeed. Rachel, thank you so much. And Devin Dyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us here at ABC. I mean, just looking at her background and just the laundry list of what she has been involved with and what she has done from a legal perspective. I mean, you know, she's received a little heat, the president has, for picking someone with a Harvard pedigree, but she also was a public defender, and she talked about her family background. I mean, her father or her brother as a police officer, yet an uncle who was a part of the drug trade. I mean, just such an interesting background. Ivy League, yes, but a woman of the people. When you look at the first nominee, a public defender in her background nominated to the court, it sends a tremendous message, Devin.
Yeah, you know, this is a historic pick on race and gender, as we've been saying, but the experience and perspective of this nominee is certainly something to look at, KYRA. And I think the president, the White House, everything I've heard from people around this nomination expect that to be a major selling point. And they're going to really hold Republicans to it, to sort of dare them to vote against someone of this pedigree, someone who, on the legal experience side of things, has more legal experience than 4 of the current justices had combined when they were nominated. 8.5 years on the federal bench, and then someone, as you said, who has represented average, everyday Americans who couldn't afford an attorney. That brings a perspective, a ground-level perspective that simply isn't on the court at this point.
All right, and Donna, another little tidbit, Devin, thank you so much, that my producer Abigail found. Boy, I would love to know what this was like. Apparently, Ted Cruz was her mate in law school. Can you imagine those conversations then and the conversations now?
Well, Ted Cruz is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I'm sure she's going to be able to give him a wink and say, hello, classmate. But, you know, she also said something that I thought should be repeated, and that is she shares the same birthday with Constant Baker Motley. We often overlook the role that Black women played in the movement for both civil rights and women's equality. Both Judge Motley as well as Polly Murray, who was one of the most brilliant Black female lawyers of her time, they helped to craft all of the legal arguments that the men who fought, they went to the Supreme Court and argued. So this is also a moment to see how far we've come as women, as minorities, but most of all, she said it in her opening statement, as Americans. We are Americans.
Indeed, we are. We will continue this conversation. Donna, Mary, Rachel, Devin, thank you all so much. And now to someone who can personally relate to President Biden's historic nomination, and yet another woman who has made history herself, the Honorable Yvette McGee, the first Black justice on the Ohio Supreme Court, now partner with Jones Day. So great to have you, Yvette. What a fantastic perspective to have you here with us, along with us on this historic day. First of all, your just overall reaction to what you just heard from our nominee to the President of the United States introducing her as you watch this along with us.
You know, KYRA, it's so nice to be with you. My heart is full right now. I mean, watching her take the podium and hearing the president nominate her, It's just such a great day to be a Black woman lawyer in America. And I loved how she started off by saying, this is the best country in the world. I mean, so often with the things that we're going through over the last few years and we've gone through in our history, we forget that only in America is Judge Jackson's story possible, is my story possible. So we really do have to stop and pause for a moment that this is history. It's America's history, and it's a profound day to see that this woman take her place in history and hopefully take her place on the bench.
So judge to judge, tell me about KBJ's reputation.
So she is known, as you heard from some of the commentators already, she is seen as a pragmatist, but she is shockingly bright. I mean, she's got a big brain. And at the end of the day, that's really what you want, right? You want somebody on the court who is smart, who can battle with their intellect and with their pen. She has all of that. Her record of achievement at Harvard, I mean, think about this. She was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. She didn't just go to Harvard, she was the editor of the Law Review. And her intellectual prowess has been demonstrated throughout her legal career. Her humbleness of spirit, what I look for in a justice, what I hope the Senate Judiciary Committee is looking for, is somebody who is going to sit on that bench, look at the Constitution, look at the law, bring all of their intellect to it, and make the best decisions for the American people. She's clearly got all of that, and we are blessed that she entered public service.
On top of that, you talk about Harvard. We were reading here in high school, class president 3 times, no doubt. Let me just throw that in there. She also was on the debate team. She was a singer. She loves American Idol. I mean, just the tidbits go on and on. It doesn't get more real than that, right? Let me ask you, Yvette, as the first Black justice on the Ohio Supreme Court, we talk about you and what you have achieved. 2 questions. First of all, your advice to KBJ now, because I would like to know what your most memorable challenges were as you were climbing the court ladder, and what inspired you to keep pushing when things got tough, and how you would advise her if you had a chance to sit down with her in this historic moment.
I love the KBJ. That's her moniker already, so I really do love that.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg would love it.
Right? Yeah. I think what she knows, and what I say to every woman who's taking on that kind of leadership position, is you never forget who you are. And that came through very clearly in her remarks. She has a supportive husband who's also a busy professional. She knows she is the mother to her children. She knows her family. When you go through these moments, and she is going to be challenged. I remember when Governor Strickland talked with me about joining the Ohio Supreme Court. I remember the Chamber of Commerce, when they were looking at my record, I walked into their meeting and I said, look, if you looked at my background and you didn't see the D beside my name, you would be enthusiastically supporting me. And I don't know if we can get there in this country in this moment, but I think if we could just remove that she's appointed by President Biden, look at her credentials, look at her career, there's no way to say she is not qualified for this. So what I would say to her is, you got this, girl. You've been here before. You know that they're going to come at you, because every Black woman who has achieved this level of success has had to navigate it. You, KYRA, as a woman, have had to navigate this. So she's well prepared for the fight ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, clearly my situation is far different from you and also KBJ, but I do remember in journalism school, it was all white men. I mean, I was considered somebody that was breaking the glass ceiling, and I saw very few women of color. I can actually just think of one that was in my journalism school. So, you know, I guess as women, we can all relate to these historic moments in different ways, right? And so as you think about the struggles ahead still for KBJ, why do you think this took so long? Why do you think this nomination finally happened?
Well, I have no explanation for why it has taken so long to get a Black woman to the United States Supreme Court. But the reason it happened is because President Biden had a commitment to diversifying the judiciary, and he made a commitment to adding someone whose lived experience to the United States Supreme Court is going to add much to the decisions. I mean, when you look at this court being founded in 1789, as you heard Rachel say, you know, 108 of the justices have been white men. Our courts should look like our country, and I think that that is a legitimate goal. Justices are appointed by presidents, so there's no explanation as to why it's taken so long. I think I want to live in this moment and just be thankful we're finally here. And what I would say to those people, those senators who are sitting on the Senate Judiciary Committee, is let's not lose this moment. This is historic. She is, for us, our Thurgood Marshall. And I hope that she is treated with the respect and dignity of any jurist who is sitting before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and to look at her qualifications. Let's not just make this a soundbite judiciary hearing. Let's look at who we're putting on that bench for the American people and have confidence in the qualifications of the nominee.
Amen to that. Final question while I have you. As for the first cases that she will be a part of, what will you be paying attention to?
I think for her first cases, I'm going to be paying attention to the questions she asks, her temperament, and then I'm going to read what she writes. As I said earlier, you know, the power of this position is you argue with your intellect and with your pen. She has demonstrated in her past decisions, she does not shy away from controversy. She is confident enough to apply the law as she sees it. I expect she will try to build coalitions. She may not always be successful, but she won't shy away from saying what needs to be said and to stating the law as she interprets it. So I am anxious to read her first decisions if she is confirmed as a justice of the United States Supreme Court.
Well, I hope, Yvette McGee Brown, that you will come back and talk with us again and again throughout this whole process to the final end. It was such an honor to have you on and talk to you. Thank you so very much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Let's take it straight to the State Department now. Ned Price speaking about Russian forces inching closer to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Let's get right to the State Department.
Yesterday, all options are on the table. All options means all. All means all. We are looking closely at additional options that may apply appropriate pressure to the Russian Federation, to President Putin, to those around him. But any additional measures would join a litany of steps that, together with our EU allies, with Australia, with Canada, with Great Britain, with New Zealand, and other countries, we announced yesterday that constitute the strongest, most consequential set of sanctions and other economic measures ever imposed. And the fact that they are responsive to this brazen, brutal, unprovoked aggression on the part of Russia against Ukraine speaks to their strength and why that strength was and is necessary. So any additional measures would complement the fact that we announced yesterday that now all 10 of Russia's largest bank, which hold 80% of the assets in Russia's banking sector, are now subject to these measures. The export controls that we have the Department of Commerce, to be specific, imposed yesterday now block the import of some 50% of the strategic imports that Moscow would need for its strategic positioning, its strategic ambitions. The fact that the Russian government is now cut off in terms of its sovereign debt from Western financing. The fact that elites around President Putin are now sanctioned and subject to those attendant restrictions. Any additional measures, and again, we have said that if President Putin continues to escalate, we will do the same, but any additional measures would join that long litany of steps that already constitute the strongest, the most decisive response that the United States, and together with our allies and partners, have ever mounted. Himar.
So I have a couple of follow-ups on both of those issues, but before, please indulge me. Foreign Policy magazine first reported this about locally employed staff working in Ukraine and how they're seeking U.S. help. So what is the plan for them? How many people are we talking about? And what is your assessment? Do you not think you have an obligation to these people?
Humaira, the Secretary and others from here have been in regular touch with the Embassy Kyiv community, and that, of course, includes our locally employed staff. You've traveled with us. You know the value that the Secretary, that the team around him attach to our locally employed staff. They are at the heart of our embassy operations around the world. Quite simply, our embassies, our posts around the world could not function without our locally employed staff. On February 24th, a couple days ago, the Locally Employed Staff Committee sent us an email following Russia's unprovoked attack against Kyiv. We are exploring all legal options available to us that would enable us to support them at what clearly is a very difficult time for our locally employed staff. We've already taken some important steps. We've implemented paid administrative leave for all staff unable to work or telework, regardless of their location. Whether our local staff are working, whether they're teleworking, whether they are unable to work, let me be clear, they are being paid. Whether they are in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, they are being paid. We have established a dedicated communications channel for all of our locally employed staff to contact us with their questions, with their concerns, so that we can be responsive directly to them. And we've provided the option of salary advances to support those locally employed staff who need an extra amount of assistance at what is clearly a very difficult time. So these relationships are deeply meaningful to us. They're deeply important to us. Again, our operations could not continue without our locally employed staff.
How many people are we talking about?
Now, I'm not in a position to offer that. All of them are being paid. All of them have these options available to them.
Okay.
Sure.
Unless you want to go into something else tomorrow. Yeah, I was just going to move on. Can I just do one quick question on that first? Okay. One thing that they asked for specifically in this letter was assistance relocating out of the country. The Biden administration has been talking about this potential assault for weeks, now. So why isn't there already a way to help these local employed staff get out of the country if they want to, and do you plan on doing that?
Well, we are exploring all options that are legally available to us and that are logistically available to us at this time. As you know, we have, for over the course of weeks now, been issuing public communications directed in the first instance at the American citizen community in Kyiv, those who otherwise would have traveled to Ukraine, urging individuals not to travel to Ukraine, and more recently urging Americans located in Ukraine to depart Ukraine. We have, of course, provided guidance to our locally engaged staff, locally employed staff, who had come to us seeking guidance, seeking direction. So I can't speak to specific cases. I can't speak to specific decisions or choices that may have been made, but we are here to support them in every conceivable way that we can.
That raises actually to believe they'd be specifically subject to Russian aggression?
I'm sorry?
Is there any reason to believe that these locally employed staff would be specifically subject to Russian aggressions?
I have not seen any indication that they would be targeted for their role, but we have seen every indication that this is intended to be on the part of the Russian Federation, not only an assault on Ukraine's territorial integrity, not only an assault on its government, but also an assault on the Ukrainian people. So we are deeply concerned about the intentions, the motivations of the Russian Federation. It's why we are seeking to bring this unprovoked, needless war to an end as quickly as we can. Humaira.
Just on this, do you know, were there any local staff who accompanied the people who went to Lviv and were working in Lviv, and who have since now been relocated basically to Poland, and who would have gone and are now temporarily, at least, living in Poland?
It was a core embassy team, Matt. That
just Americans, or were there local staff too?
It was a core embassy team. I'm not in a position to offer if there were any locally employed staff with them. Kimar.
Just to close the loop on sanctions, and then I'll move on to UN very briefly. So the assessments out there about how long it would take Russian forces to overrun Kyiv is mentioned like in days. And yet the president and others in this government said yesterday sanctions would be more impactful in time. Is it fair to say then in the immediate term, U.S. is basically unable to stop Putin?
I don't think you heard anyone say that. What you have heard us say is that, well, let me back up. Over the course of months now, we have been ringing the alarm bell as we had information available to us as early as late last year that Vladimir Putin had these intentions. We started to see his forces mobilize around that time. You remember in November of 2021 when we first started to speak about this publicly. Beyond our public messaging, we engaged in robust private diplomacy behind closed doors to ensure that our allies and partners around the world knew what we knew so that we could operate in tandem with one another. When it comes to the sanctions that you mentioned, these were coordinated with allies and partners around the world. Part of what gives them the bite, the heft that they have, is that these were not just measures that were introduced by the United States, but also by the European Union.
It doesn't matter how many people, how many countries introduce that. It's a matter of time. And we're talking about days, and President openly said that they don't have the days. But
you will look, if you see what has transpired in the Russian marketplace over the course not only of recent days, but of recent weeks. The threat of these massive consequences have pushed the ruble to its lowest levels in years, pushed the Russian stock market, pushed down investor sentiment, and have made clear that these measures have tremendous bite. And we saw that yesterday when these measures were introduced. So what is true is that these measures are designed to garner strength, to garner momentum over time. But with their immediate introduction yesterday, on top of the measures that we imposed on Monday in response to President Putin's recognition of these so-called republics in eastern Ukraine, you have seen that there has been an immediate effect. There has been an immediate bite.
My final one is on UN. The vote is delayed for an hour. Do you know why?
I do not. You would need to
Are you
ask
confident you've got UAE and India to vote yes?
We are confident that the Russian Federation will be and will be shown to be isolated on the world stage. We are confident that our partners, that our allies around the world will stand in very clear, very stark opposition to this aggression, to this assault on Ukraine's territorial integrity, to its independence, to its sovereignty. We have every expectation that message will emanate loud and clear from this UN session.
All your partners, including India and UAE.
We have every expectation that message will be loud and clear to the Russian Federation, unambiguous to President Putin. Yes.
Can I follow up on something that you said when you were speaking with Matt? You said if you were to listen to the blunder of President Putin, you might believe he was willing to go beyond Ukraine. Do you have reason to believe that that is the case?
President Putin knows, because we have stated very clearly that our commitment to NATO's Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, is as vibrant, is as sacrosanct as it was at NATO's founding some 7 decades ago. You heard the president say again yesterday that we will fight for every inch of NATO territory. That is a message that we have made very clear in public. It is a message that we have conveyed very clearly in private. I have no doubt that message has reached President Putin.
And one separate question. I want to do a follow-up.
And then I'll hand it right back to you. But is there anything specific to indicate? The NATO Secretary General said today that there are indications that the Kremlin's objectives spanned beyond Ukraine. Is there anything to suggest from the U.S.'s perspective that they do?
Well, what we have seen from President Putin, not only in recent days, but in recent years, is his desire to go back to an era that has long since passed, an era in which spheres of influence are acceptable, an era in which large countries can bully small countries, an era in which might equals right. That is an era that should have ended, certainly with the fall of the Berlin Wall, certainly with the end of the Cold War. But of course, President Putin has other desires, other aspirations. It is our task to reinforce the rules that have, again, governed the international community over the course of some 70 years, but certainly in more recent years since the end of the Cold War. Abigail.
Can you give us any update on your efforts to help Americans who are still in Ukraine? I know you are always hesitant to give exact numbers, but do you have any further indication of how many Americans have crossed over the border into Poland, for instance?
So, as you've heard us say, we don't have precise figures in any country around the world of the number of Americans who are present in a foreign country at any given time. And you know those reasons well. We don't track Americans. We don't require them to register. We don't require them to unregister when they leave a country. In the case of Ukraine, however, we did have an estimate, and we do have an estimate, dated from October of last year of Americans resident in Ukraine. At the time, October of 2021, there were 6,600 Americans resident in Ukraine by our estimation. And that estimation was based on data from our Ukrainian partners. It was based on data that was available to us as well, including data from local organizations. That same month, October of 2021, is this very same month that we started warning Americans not to travel to Ukraine. It was those warnings were later superseded by clear and consistent encouragement to Americans to leave the country, and most recently, warnings that Americans should leave the country. So since October of 2021, we have seen...
You've been listening to State Department spokesperson Ned Price giving us an update on the Ukraine-Russia situation. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm KYRA Phillips. Thanks so much for streaming with us as our special coverage continues here on ABC News Live. A live look now at the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv as Russian forces approach the city. Here's what we know right now. NATO activating its response force, the first time the alliance has ever activated the 40,000 troops for deterrence and defense. The push toward Kyiv reportedly going slower than the Russians had expected, especially in the past 24 hours. The Pentagon saying there's been greater resistance by Ukrainians, and it appears the Russians have lost momentum. A senior defense official telling us only about a third of the 150,000 troops amassed on the border are actually fighting, and as of now, Russia has not committed the majority of its forces inside Ukraine. Thousands of Russian Navy infantry landing near the coastal city of Mariupol now, which could see heavy fighting. And President Biden speaking with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier today. Zelensky tweeting that they discussed strengthening sanctions, defense assistance, and an anti-war coalition. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also announcing new sanctions against Putin and urging other NATO leaders to take further action to inflict maximum pain on the regime. All of this happening as Meta says Russia has restricted the use of Facebook after the company refused to stop fact-checking Russia media outlets. Joining us now with the very latest, ABC's Ian Pannell. He's in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. Also, ABC's Phil Lipoff is in Poland. Thank you both for just continuing our coverage with us. Ian, let's start with you. Russian troops continuing their assault on the country, zeroing in on Kyiv. New satellite images actually showing Russia crossing from Belarus into Ukraine in an effort to fully take over the capital. What does it feel like to be there right now? Give us an update.
Yeah, KYRA, I mean, I have to say the mood is bleaker, the situation more tense, the future looking more dark than at any point in this crisis so far. This really is a city bracing itself for the worst. We know that Russian forces were spotted inside Kyiv today. Defense forces have been activated in the city. We've seen troops running around. I've seen trucks loaded with ammunition driving around, people setting up defensive positions. The head of the armed forces essentially lifted almost all restrictions on anyone joining the army, including age restrictions. They've been handing out thousands of weapons to civilians for them also to defend their areas. We're hearing stories of people setting up defensive units in their neighborhoods. there is a real sense here that the worst is about to come. And given the tone of what we've been hearing from the Kremlin, there doesn't seem to be any appetite whatsoever to try and find a diplomatic way out of this. This is going to be a battle. It's going to be bloody. There are going to be a lot of casualties, and there are now tens of thousands of Ukrainians on the run.
And as you report that, and we hear these details from you, Ian, at the same time, it seems quite remarkable that the president of Ukraine actually posted a video just outside of his office there in Kyiv showing that leadership is still in the city and that they plan to fight. How has this impacted morale, and how unusual is it to put out a video like this?
Yeah, I mean, this is all about morale. This is all about stiffening resolve. President Zelensky clearly feels he has to lead from the front. Inevitably, there is going to be disinformation thrown around by the Russians about this. And, of course, the Ukrainians have to use propaganda to their advantage. But, yes, we identified that this was right outside his offices, together with the defense minister, the prime minister, the head of parliament, essentially saying, we are here. Now, Zelensky also today talking, saying, look, it's all very well you showing us support from abroad, but we're here on our own, you know, and no one's coming to Ukraine's aid in terms of the fighting, and they are feeling the pressure. They know they face a far superior military, and yes, it's possible that we're going to see tens of thousands of people pick up weapons ready to defend themselves, but they are facing overwhelming odds. It is going to be a bitter and bloody and brutal battle, and it's going to be a very hard 24, 48 hours ahead. There was a moment today when perhaps it looked like there could be some kind of diplomatic breakthrough, but it didn't look serious. It didn't look like the Russians were serious, and President Zelensky is not ready to surrender, which is essentially what the Russians are saying. Vladimir Putin, again, talking about sort of proto-Nazi units in the country without offering any evidence whatsoever, but this is his alternate universe. This is his justification for this war, that this is defending the security and the safety of Russia and the Russian-speaking people. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. This is an act of aggression. As President Biden said, it's a war of choice, and it's a war that has no meaning. There's no real purpose here other than to crush Ukraine, expand Russian influence, trying to restore some warped sense of Russian military and geographic pride. But we've seen opposition inside Russia. We've seen Russian figures, sporting figures, voice their opposition to what's going on here. You know, the peoples of Europe are speaking loudly against this. But the truth is, the people of Kiev are alone tonight, and many of them are sleeping in basements, sleeping in metro stations, and they're afraid, and they're quite rightly afraid of what is about to happen.
As we see the video right there that you and your photographer have been able to capture for us inside Ukraine there. Meanwhile, Phil, the UN refugee agency now estimated some 100,000 Ukrainians have already been forced from their homes. How are neighboring countries preparing to take on these refugees, and specifically where you are as well?
Well, quite frankly, KYRA, the borders are open and the countries are willing to do this, but it is going to be a monumental task. You hear Ian describe the dark time that has fallen upon the capital city, Kyiv, in Ukraine, across the border, and yet people will be sleeping in basements tonight, those who stayed. Ian points out that tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands are working their way toward the borders. Here in Poland, an aid worker told us that the country of Poland has opened up 123 reception centers. These are places to receive Ukrainians who come into this country. They will not be areas where people can camp out. They will be areas where the Ukrainians can come and then sort of transition into life here. Poland already has about 2 million Ukrainians living here. So some of these people crossing the border will have family and friends, but some will be coming into a country they don't know. But the borders are open in the countries surrounding Ukraine, and the wait, KYRA, is anywhere from 10 to 20 hours depending on the border.
So, Phil, you've been in contact, I understand, with our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, as she and her team just crossed into Slovakia, right? What have you heard on that?
We've been in contact with Martha and her producer, Sam, and I really feel like it's important to get this information out there because you can hear the words refugee crisis. We've heard them before. But what Martha and Sam just experienced is something that needs to be told to the world, and people really have to try to visualize it. Martha and Sam walked across the border, a rural border, into Slovakia. They chose that border because they thought it would be one of the easiest to cross. The wait to cross into Slovakia at that border is about 10 hours right now. They walked across it with women and children, Ukrainian women and children. The men 18 to 60 stood at the border. Think about this, KYRA. They stood at the border and hugged and kissed their families goodbye and watched the women and children walk into unknown territory, uncertain territory in Slovakia. People were crying as they were hugging their families. They were so unprepared, Martha and Sam report, that they didn't have gloves on. This is bitter cold in this region. And these men 18 to 16, as Ian just pointed out, are being told they can't leave the country. They have to stay and fight. Most of these people aren't fighters. They're not in the military. And they just had to say goodbye to their wives and children as they watched them walk into Slovakia. That is the face of a refugee crisis that is only just beginning.
As we see those faces right now in the pictures that you capture for us, it's a story we will stay closely on, indeed, from Kyiv to Poland. Phil and Ian, thank you both. And Phil, I'll take it back to you.
All right, KYRA, thank you. I want to bring in Tom Bossert. The NATO alliance says that there was a price to pay here. And Tom is a national security analyst, a former White House Homeland Security advisor. Tom, thanks for being with us. It's always good to discuss this with you. What do you make of NATO activating its response force for the first time in history? What exactly does that deterrence and defense mean in this particular role?
I think it's an incredibly wise move. I'd have recommended it. In fact, I'm not surprised by it at all. What we're seeing now is Putin in a completely unpredictable use of force right on all of their borders. So at this stage, it's only almost obvious that NATO activate this force. There's so much room for miscalculation here. In a lot of ways, Putin has let the genie out of the bottle. We can have Russian jets incurring, flying into other airspace, NATO airspace, Turkish airspace, Polish airspace, drawing fire and leading this thing into directions that we can't control. His military will take actions even without his permission if that happens, and it could spiral. So NATO has an obligation here to kind of circle the wagons.
Yeah, and Tom, we heard today from the Czech Republic that the Czech Republic and Poland restricting airspace to Russian carriers. The Russians do not have superiority over Ukraine. Ukrainian air defenses are still working. How significant is that for this fight against the Russians?
It's significant for, I guess, two reasons. One, it's a bit surprising that they haven't yet carried that out. It's usually the first step or one of the early steps in the Russian playbook, or really, I think, in any military playbook, or at least that's what most of the generals have been saying. We've seen this play out in the past. There's this acronym in Russian military planning called SOCTUS, where they go after strategically damaging all of the enemy's critical infrastructure targets. It's pretty standard in their military planning playbook. So I suspect if they really want to, they will do it. I think it reveals, though, at least to me, that Putin does not have a clear military objective. At least it's not clear to any of the observers that I talked to. We don't know what he wants to achieve or whether he has the force adequate to achieve it and sustain it. If he really wants to take on maintaining control over Ukraine, given what we've seen in the defiant eyes of the Ukrainian people, he better have more forces ready to stay there longer. And I think he's got to decide whether he wants that objective. If he does make that decision, they'll take out air defense systems pretty quickly.
Tom, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that NATO members would need to discuss whether a cyber attack against a NATO ally would then trigger that Article 5 response from the alliance. Talk about that for a second. What might that response look like?
Yeah, this has been brewing for a very long time. In fact, one of the NATO members, Estonia, many people will remember, they were attacked, a cyber attack that devastated their economy and their government systems by Russia. And they're a NATO member, and they asked NATO to consider that an act of war that would trigger the collective defense obligation under Article 5. And in fact, NATO chose not to take that action as a justification to attack further Russia. That's been a pending debate ever since. I think context here matters. So if that cyber attack causes physical harm, loss of life, and if it's done with the backdrop of this threatening buildup of military forces, I think NATO will view it differently. But there'll not be anybody arguing lightly to take any small pinprick cyber attack as a justification to get into war with Russia. It'll have to be something significant, but it certainly qualifies. And I'm glad that she said they're discussing it, because whether it's a cyber attack or a missile, if it kills people and destroys your territory or your possessions, that's grounds for defending yourself, and it's grounds for a collective defense.
President Biden spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky again today, and after that conversation, Zelensky tweeted that they discussed strengthening sanctions, concrete defense, assistance, and an anti-war coalition. What does he mean by that, and what role could U.S. forces play in that kind of coalition?
Well, I can see a lot of U.S. force deployment to take up the backfill roles of other European forces if the Europeans start to send direct military aid into Ukraine. I think the president's been pretty clear, and at this point, even if he changed his mind, I don't know if he's got the domestic support for sending American forces directly into Ukraine. I think that what he discussed, though, on these sanctions being strong enough or weak enough is a really unfortunate sign of the stress that the Ukrainian people are under. I don't think any additional sanctions will have the immediate effect that President Zelensky is seeking, although I don't blame him for asking. We should pretty much try anything at this stage. I think instead most of these sanctions are designed to punish Russia and to attack their operating budget so that they can't sustain this for a long period of time. That's not very satisfying to people who are in harm's way watching their neighbors being killed, but it's not a direct defensive tool, and I think Zelensky is trying to apply it in that way.
And Tom, you're talking about the stress that Ukrainians are under. The UN says hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are on the move through the country, whether it's from the Donbas region all the way over to where I am in Poland because of this Russian invasion. They're talking about tens of thousands of them have already crossed into other countries. How is this, what is obviously going to turn into some sort of refugee crisis? How is that going to affect Europe and the U.S.?
It's going to strain everyone's ability to take care of their fellow man. We're going to see European countries having to accept a large diaspora of fleeing Ukrainians. All of us want to. American and European hearts are often larger than our bread baskets. So I'm not afraid of the willingness of the European host countries or American host countries, but there will be an adjustment period there where you handle large inflows of people. You have to find housing and food sources adequate to take care of their needs. And remember, this is all happening in winter for a reason. I think you're seeing a lot of European hesitancy to turn on certain sanctions and address the SWIFT issue because, like it or not, they are dependent on Russian heating, oil, and gas. And so you don't want to freeze people to death. You want to make sure that there's a flow of energy source, and you want to make sure that these refugees have a place where they can find shelter and protection from the shelling. So I think that we'll see a generous community, a generous global response, and some pretty significant suffering in the interim.
Yeah, and we're seeing that happening here now in Poland as Poland welcomes those refugees, even in lines that are miles long. Tom Bossert, always good to talk to you. Thanks for the expertise. KYRA?
Thank you.
Phil, Tom, thank you so much. Coming up, a historic day, as you know, here in the U.S. We are going to hear from Ketanji Brown Jackson as President Biden announces her as his Supreme Court pick.
what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're gonna move back. Let's move back. We're surrounded by people squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go there.
So my question, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Breaking news, live events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source. Take America's #1 news with you, anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
The deeper you go into black markets, the darker it gets.
Traffic, Wednesdays at 9 on National Geographic.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Can I hug you?
Yes.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
Christopher Steele.
The guy who picked a fight with 2 presidents, and he's lived to tell the tale.
That now infamous dossier.
Supposedly a tape showing prostitutes hired by Donald Trump urinating on a bed, and would be quite a tape if it in fact existed.
I said take out the PP tape.
It quickly became a question of how much of this was accurate.
This is the stuff of movies.
A lot of this is the stuff of movies. The story of epic proportions.
Phony stuff.
It's a bunch of crap.
It changed history.
And welcome back, everyone. I'm KYRA Phillips. So glad you're with us. Well, President Biden made history today, nominating the first black woman to the highest court in the land, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is, as she addressed the American people today.
Justice Breyer, in particular, not only gave me the greatest job that any young lawyer could ever hope to have, but he also exemplified every day, in every way, that a Supreme Court justice can perform at the highest level of skill and integrity while also being guided by civility, grace, pragmatism, and generosity of spirit. Justice Breyer, the members of the Senate will decide if I fill your seat, but please know that I could never fill your shoes.
For more, let's bring in ABC News contributor and professor of history at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Leo Wright-Rigger. Thank you so much for being here with us. Tell me what this means to you as you listened to the president today and then, of course, listened to Judge Brown Jackson.
Sure. So this is historic. There's no way around it. I mean, you know, there has, in the entire court's history, there has never been a black woman appointed to the Supreme Court, despite that the fact that there have been, you know, innumerable black women that have been qualified to be on the Supreme Court. It wasn't until recently that black women were even seriously considered for the Supreme Court, making the short list. And in fact, Brown Jackson is one of the first black women to make the short list for Supreme Court. It also is historic, I think, in showcasing the breadth of black political thought. So this is the first time. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was kind of insane, almost laughable to imagine 2 black people on the Supreme Court. And in private circles, there were often conversations about the riskiness of having 2 black people on the Supreme Court. Well, now that's going to become a reality. And those 2 black people have very different political orientations. They think about the law, they think about justice, they think about American society and values radically differently, even though they come from the same racial community and in fact have very similar backgrounds. So we're going to see, I think, a number of historic events, a number of historic moments that come out of the simple nomination of a black woman to the Supreme Court for the first time in the court's entire history.
So let me ask you this. Leah, as you look at her background and we learn more about her, we listened to how humble she was today and what she told the American people, yet she did get pushback from members of Congress even before her nomination. Republicans criticizing the president for his vow to nominate the first black woman to the highest court. What do you think this says about where we are as a country right now?
Well, I think a lot of the pushback that Brown Jackson received is what we might call cynical political posturing. We know that we're in a highly polarized and partisan environment, and that in fact, any nominee that Biden put forward was going to result in some kind of pushback, some kind of challenge. You know, certainly there would be degrees of challenges. Do we put up a significant fight or do we put up a little bit of a fight? So that does matter. But we knew that anyone that was going to be put forward, even kind of the most mundane, the most neutral of appointments, would receive challenge. The other thing to keep in mind, I think, here, though, is that at no point in time have the people putting forward Supreme Court nominees not considered things like gender, race, religious orientation, all of those things in backroom private dealings. All of those things have always been on the table, particularly at a period in time where people, because of their race, because of their skin color, because of their sexual orientation, were banned from participating in the nomination process or excluded from participating in the political process. So these kinds of conversations, in fact, are not new. They're not, different from old. But I do think that it matters, in fact, that Brown Jackson has actually come before Congress, has come before Republicans, and has made her way through the process, very similar process, although certainly not this public, but has made her way through similar processes with very little pushback. But I do think, and it's going to be important to pay attention to this, that it's a signal, the challenges that she's receiving, it's a signal for how partisan and how polarized we are in this moment.
Well, and that leads me to my next question. This was Biden's campaign promise, right? Why do you think that this Supreme Court nomination took so long in the first place?
Well, there are a number of things, and there are a number of reasons that go into selecting a Supreme Court justice. But when it comes to Black women, historically, when a Black woman's name has even been brought up in the circle of the Supreme Court, there is a way in which, by virtue of that person being a Black woman, they are invalidated. So Black women are seen as less than. They are seen as unqualified, even though they are often overqualified for the position. They have to jump through far more hurdles, as we've seen, because of the fact that this is the first time in the Supreme Court's history that a Black woman has come forward, has even made it this far in the process. So one of the things that we're seeing here, and I think that is worth acknowledging beyond the symbolism, beyond the symbolic value of this appointment, is the very real action of righting a wrong that has persisted despite progress, despite legislation, despite significant changes in public opinion. So righting a wrong and making right something that has been long overdue. So here is a Black woman who is highly qualified, in fact, again, overqualified, who is finally going to be put forward as deserving to be on the highest court of the land, most powerful court of the land.
Well, times are definitely a-changing, and as we say that and witness that, how do you think just the overall impact will be, this nomination, what it will have just on Black women everywhere in all types of professions?
Well, the largest impact that it's going to have is deeply symbolic, but I want to emphasize that the symbolism of putting a Black woman in a space where Black women have long been excluded, even banned, denied, even though that's incredibly symbolic and powerful, there's also a way in which it is deeply significant, because it is essentially the breaking down of barriers, pre-existing barriers that have persisted for generations. So it suggests that Black women, in fact, don't have to go through these hurdles, have to jump through these loopholes. It is a shattering of the glass ceiling not just for gender, but also of race. So that is incredibly important. But I also think at a moment where the Supreme Court has been besieged by questions of partisanship, of political bias, of problematics, right, of enormous drama, the likes of which we have not seen in several generations, that Brown Jackson, I think, appointment could be a very significant and bright light for the court. That in fact, it can be representative of the possibilities, right, of democracy and how things can work when we work together and when we right historic wrongs.
Dr. Leah Wright-Rigueur, always great talking to you, especially on a day like today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now to Russia, where anti-war protests have broken out across the country and hundreds of people have been arrested. All of this happening as more sanctions have been announced against Russia's Vladimir Putin. ABC's foreign correspondent James Longman now with the latest from Moscow.
Yeah, hi, Kira. Sanctions really are heating up now. We've had it confirmed that the European Union and the UK are going to sanction Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, and Vladimir Putin himself. This has never happened before. It is an asset freeze, which basically means they can't get hold of any money they might have across the European Union or in the UK. It is, I would say, more symbolic than anything. Very wealthy people can often have assets in other people's names. We don't know if that's what Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov do, but certainly on a symbolic level, this is pretty major. The other thing that Europe is considering, and this would actually be a big sanction, very disruptive to Russia, is take them off the SWIFT financial system. Now, this is a system which enables countries and international corporations to pay one another. It's a payment system. If Russia is taken off it, it then makes life very, very difficult for trade and could have a significant impact on this country. They thought, in fact, that Europe was going to do that in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. And for that reason, Russia came up with a system called MIR. It's a card which you can use for payments. The government can pay you directly. Pensioners are paid through MIR, for instance. And that's why they created it. So there is a way, kind of, for Russia to get round it domestically. But internationally, this is huge. It could be a massive, massive impact on the economy. It's what Ukraine has been asking for. And I've got to tell you, sanctions already feel like they're starting to pinch here. I mean, we've been trying to make payments at our hotel, and we found that very difficult. And I was on the streets last night at protests, and there were young people out very angry that Vladimir Putin has done this. I'd say that you know, a good majority of Russians still back Vladimir Putin because they watch so much state media, but young people specifically are upset about it. And I spoke about the sanctions with one, and he said, well, yeah, it's all very well to sanction the very rich and the oligarchs and Vladimir Putin, but what it means to me is that I can't maybe get a visa to go and study abroad. I can't buy the stuff I usually buy when I'm here. Electronics, for example, have gone up overnight in one major department store 30% because the ruble has crashed so much against the dollar. So regular Russians are going to start really feeling the pinch here. Car parts for cars they like to drive that are from Europe or the United States, not going to be possible to get hold of. Aeroplane parts is actually one of the things that's going to be really hit. Aeroflot now, the carrier, cannot fly over Europe, cannot go to the United Kingdom. I mean, this is pretty serious, and Vladimir Putin likes to say that sanctions don't hurt, but this is going to be difficult to argue, and if it goes on for some time, Russian people are going to start to feel the squeeze in a serious way, and the argument that sanctions is just something that we have to bear as a Russian nation against the aggression of the West might not be an argument that Russians could put up with for too much longer. So the sanctions that we're hearing about now, I think, are pretty serious. Kira?
James Longman from Moscow, as always. Thank you so much, James. And that does it for us right now. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm KYRA Phillips. The news continues here on ABC News Live right after this. Don't go far.